The clamor of the auction house fell to a hush as Catherine O'Brien was brought to the stage, her auburn hair ablaze in the late afternoon sun that filtered through the dusty windows. Shackled and dressed in a tattered gown that had once been fine, she held her head high despite the humiliation of being sold to cover her late father's debts. It was 1875 in the frontier town of Silver Creek, Colorado, and a woman with no family or means had few options. The auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth, gripped her arm as he called out her name and credentials to the crowd of rough-hewn prospectors, businessmen, and cowboys. In the back of the room, Grant Dawson tipped his hat lower over his eyes. He hadn't planned on attending the auction today. He'd only come to town for supplies before heading back to his ranch. But something about the dignified way she stood, refusing to break even as men appraised her like livestock, stirred something in him. When the bidding started, his hand rose before his mind could catch up with his actions. $200, he called out, his deep voice carrying across the room. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. 200 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 250? A wealthy mine owner raised his hand. 250. Grant didn't hesitate. 300. He hadn't come with the intention of spending his cattle money on anything but feed and equipment, but he couldn't bear to see this woman go to someone who'd treat her poorly. The bidding continued, but Grant was determined. When it reached $500, nearly all the money he had with him, the room finally fell silent. 500 going once, going twice, sold to the cowboy in the back. Catherine's eyes found his for the first time deep green and filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Grant approached the stage, paid the auctioneer, and watched as the shackles were removed from her wrists. "You own me now," she said quietly when he reached her, rubbing her chafed wrists. "No, madam," Grant replied, keeping his voice low. "I don't believe in owning people. I just couldn't stand by and watch." Confusion flickered across her face. "Then what do you intend to do with me?" "Give you a choice, Miss O'Brien. You can come work at my ranch paid, fair and square, or I can give you enough money to make your way somewhere else. Whatever you decide." For the first time, a glimmer of something like hope appeared in her eyes. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Grant shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention they were receiving. "Let's discuss it outside. Too many ears in here." As they stepped into the bright sunlight, Catherine squinted and held her hand up to shield her eyes. Grant noticed how pale she was, how delicate her wrists seemed, and wondered what circumstances had brought a clearly educated woman to such a desperate situation. "My ranch is about half a day's ride from here," he explained. "I've got a small operation, about 60 head of cattle, some horses." "It's not much, but it's honest work." Catherine studied him, wariness evident in her posture. "And what would my duties be, Mr. Dawson?" "Grant, please. And I need help with cooking, keeping the house in order. I've been living like a bachelor too long, and the place shows it." He cleared his throat. "You'd have your own room with a lock on the door. I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll be treated with respect." She glanced back at the auction house, then down the dusty main street of Silver Creek. "I don't have many options, do I?" "Everyone has options, Miss O'Brien. Some are just better than others." After a moment of consideration, she straightened her shoulders. "Very well, I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Dawson Grant, but I want to be clear that this is a business arrangement." "Of course." He nodded, relieved she hadn't chosen to take the money and leave. The truth was, he was desperately in need of help around the ranch. His partner had died the previous winter, and managing everything alone had been nearly impossible. "Do you have any belongings?" he asked. A shadow crossed her face. "Everything was sold to pay my father's debts. This dress is all I have left." Grant frowned. "We'll need to remedy that. There's a general store down the street, nothing fancy, but they'll have what you need." An hour later, Catherine had 2 simple dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a coat for the coming autumn, and basic toiletries. Grant had turned his back while she selected the intimate items, his ears burning red with embarrassment. He'd also purchased a horse for her, a gentle mare with a chestnut coat, since his own horse couldn't carry double for the long ride to the ranch. As they rode out of town, Catherine remained quiet, taking in the vast expanse of prairie and distant mountains. The late summer sun beat down mercilessly, but occasional clouds provided brief respites of shade. "May I ask what brought you to that auction block?" Grant finally asked, breaking the silence. Catherine's hands tightened on the reins. "My father was a doctor. We came west from Boston after my mother died, hoping for a fresh start. He built a practice in Silver Creek, but—" She paused. "He developed a fondness for gambling and whiskey. I didn't realize how bad it had become until he died 3 weeks ago of pneumonia. Turned out he'd mortgaged everything, borrowed from everyone. The bank took our home and his creditors wanted their money." "I'm sorry," Grant said simply. "The law said his debts transferred to me, and when I couldn't pay—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. "That's not right," Grant muttered. "Perhaps not, but it's the way of things. Women have few rights when it comes to property and debt." Her voice was matter of fact, but Grant could hear the underlying bitterness. They rode in silence for a while longer before Catherine spoke again. "What about you? How did you end up ranching in Colorado Territory?" Grant adjusted his hat, considering his words. "I fought for the Union in the war. Afterward, there wasn't much left for me in Virginia. My family's farm was destroyed, parents both gone. I headed west with a friend, Sam Porter. We pooled our savings and built the ranch together." His voice grew quieter. "Sam died last winter, influenza." "I'm sorry for your loss," Catherine said, and Grant appreciated that she didn't offer platitudes. "It's been hard running things alone," he admitted. "The cattle need constant attention, and I haven't had time for much else." By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and Grant pointed to a valley below where a modest ranch house stood near a creek, surrounded by pens, a barn, and grazing land. "That's it, Dawson Ranch, nothing fancy, but it's home." Catherine took in the weathered buildings, the small garden that had clearly seen better days, the horses in the corral, and the cattle dotting the hillsides. "It looks peaceful." Grant smiled for the first time that day. "It is most days." He clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward. "Come on, you must be exhausted." As they approached the ranch house, Catherine felt a mixture of trepidation and relief. The journey from town had been long, and her body ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. The house was a simple 2-story structure built of logs with a covered porch wrapping around the front. A water pump stood in the yard, and chickens scratched in the dirt nearby. "I'll show you to your room so you can rest before dinner," Grant said as he helped her dismount. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, and he steadied her with a strong hand on her elbow. "Thank you," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. Inside, the house was exactly what Catherine would expect of a bachelor's dwelling, functional but lacking any homey touches. The main floor consisted of a kitchen with a large wooden table, a sitting area with 2 worn armchairs before a stone fireplace, and what appeared to be a small office. A staircase led to the second floor. "Your room is upstairs," Grant explained, carrying her new belongings. "It was Sam's, but I've cleaned it out." He led her to a modest bedroom with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the creek. As promised, the door had a sturdy lock. "The washroom is at the end of the hall. There's a pump in there for water, and I keep a kettle on the stove if you want it warm." He set her things on the bed. "I'll let you get settled. Dinner in an hour," Catherine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. When Grant closed the door behind him, she sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of quiet tears, not of sadness, but of relief. Whatever this new situation might bring, it was infinitely better than what awaited her at the auction block. After washing her face and changing into one of her new dresses, Catherine made her way downstairs. She found Grant in the kitchen, attempting to fry bacon and looking distinctly out of his element. "May I?" she asked, approaching the stove. He stepped back gratefully. "Please, I'm no cook." "Sam used to handle this part." Catherine took over, salvaging the bacon and finding potatoes and eggs to round out the meal. As she worked, she asked questions about the running of the ranch, learning that besides Grant, there was only one hired hand, Miguel Vasquez, who lived in a small cabin near the barn and helped with the cattle. "He's visiting his family in a settlement south of here," Grant explained. "He'll be back in a couple of days." They ate at the kitchen table, the silence broken only by the clink of cutlery against plates. Catherine couldn't help noticing Grant's manners. He might be a rancher now, but he'd clearly been raised as a gentleman. She wondered about his life before the war but didn't ask. "This is the best meal I've had in months," Grant said when he'd cleaned his plate. "Thank you." "It's simple fare," Catherine replied, but she was pleased by the compliment. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the property, introduce you to the routine." He stood and collected their plates. "You should rest now, it's been a long day." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Catherine listened to the sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the aspens near the creek, the occasional creak of the house settling. Despite the strangeness of her situation, she felt safer than she had in weeks. Grant Dawson was an enigma, a man who'd spent a small fortune to rescue her from a terrible fate, asking nothing in return but honest work. Such men were rare in her experience. She wondered what the coming days would bring and fell asleep with cautious hope in her heart for the first time since her father's death. The next morning, Catherine woke to the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find Grant already up and about, his hair damp from washing. "Good morning," he said. "Coffee's hot if you want some. I'm afraid I don't have much for breakfast besides bread and preserves." "That's fine," she assured him, pouring herself a cup. "I can bake today if you have flour." "Flour, sugar, salt, basic supplies are in the pantry. I ride into town once a month for provisions." He hesitated. "I should warn you, the garden's in a sorry state. I haven't had time to tend it properly." After breakfast, Grant gave her a tour of the ranch. The property was larger than it had appeared from the hill, nearly 200 acres, with the creek providing a reliable water source even in dry months. The barn housed 4 horses besides their own mounts, along with tack, tools, and feed. The chicken coop contained a dozen hens and 1 rooster who eyed them suspiciously. "They're laying well," Grant noted, "but I lose track of gathering the eggs sometimes." Throughout the morning, Catherine observed Grant with the animals. He was gentle but firm, speaking to them in low tones, his hands sure and confident. It was clear he cared deeply for his ranch and the creatures in his care. By midday, Catherine had a good understanding of the daily routine and what would be expected of her. When they returned to the house for lunch, she rolled up her sleeves and set to work on the kitchen, which desperately needed organization. "I hope you don't mind," she said when Grant raised an eyebrow at her rearrangement of the cupboards. "Not at all. This is your domain now." He paused. "I should get back to the herd. Will you be all right on your own?" She nodded, already planning what to tackle next. After he left, Catherine spent the afternoon cleaning the kitchen from top to bottom, then examined the garden. It was overgrown with weeds, but many of the vegetables were salvageable: tomatoes, beans, carrots, and potatoes. She worked until her back ached, pulling weeds and harvesting what was ready. When Grant returned at dusk, she had a stew simmering on the stove and fresh bread cooling on the counter. The kitchen gleamed, and she'd even found time to sweep the sitting area. He stopped in the doorway, looking around in amazement. "This doesn't even look like the same house." Catherine wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope I haven't overstepped." "No, it's wonderful." He removed his hat, hanging it on a peg by the door. "Something smells delicious." During dinner, Grant seemed more relaxed, telling her stories about the cattle and the challenges of ranching. Catherine found herself laughing at his description of a particularly stubborn heifer named Matilda who constantly found ways to escape her pen. "You love it here, don't you?" she observed. His expression softened. "I do. It's hard work, and sometimes I wonder if Sam and I bit off more than we could chew, but—" He gestured to the window, where the setting sun was painting the hills gold and crimson. How could anyone not love this land? Over the next few days, they settled into a routine. Catherine rose early to prepare breakfast before Grant headed out to the range. She spent her days cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, and caring for the chickens. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, gradually learning more about each other. She discovered that Grant had been studying law before the war, that he came from a family of tobacco farmers in Virginia, that he played the harmonica, though poorly, by his own admission. He learned that she was well-read, having been educated by her father, that she could speak French, and that she had a talent for sketching. On the fourth day, Miguel returned from visiting his family. He was a wiry man in his 30s with a quick smile and excellent English. Catherine liked him immediately, especially when she saw how he and Grant worked together with mutual respect and the easy camaraderie of men who trusted each other. "The señorita has worked miracles on the house," Miguel commented at dinner that night, having been invited to join them. "And this stew, Grant, you must pay her double or she will surely be stolen away by another rancher." Grant chuckled, but Catherine noticed a flicker of something concern, perhaps, cross his face at the suggestion. Later, as she was washing the dishes, he approached her with an envelope. "Your first week's wages," he said, placing it on the counter. "It's not much, but it's a start." Catherine dried her hands and picked up the envelope, surprised by its weight. When she peeked inside, her eyes widened. "This is too much. It's fair," Grant insisted. "You've done more in a few days than I could have hoped for." She wanted to argue, but saw the determination in his eyes. "Thank you," she said instead, tucking the envelope into her pocket. That night, as she counted the money in the privacy of her room, Catherine realized it was more than she would have earned in a month as a seamstress or laundress in town. For the first time, she began to think beyond day-to-day survival. Perhaps with careful saving, she could eventually build a new life for herself, maybe even open a small school, as she'd once dreamed of doing. The next morning brought dark clouds and the promise of rain. Grant looked concerned as he gazed out the window during breakfast. "We need to move the herd to higher ground," he told Miguel. "The creek floods quickly in heavy rain." "I will saddle the horses," Miguel replied, already heading for the door. "Can I help?" Catherine asked. Grant looked surprised. "It's going to be wet, muddy work." "I'm not afraid of a little mud," she assured him. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "All right, do you have a coat?" The three of them rode out as the first fat raindrops began to fall. By the time they reached the herd, the rain was coming down in sheets. Catherine had never herded cattle before, but she followed Grant's instructions, helping to guide the animals toward a plateau where they would be safe from rising water. The work was indeed wet and muddy, and more difficult than she had anticipated. The cattle were skittish in the storm, and several times they nearly broke away in the wrong direction. Catherine's horse, thankfully, seemed to understand the job better than she did. By mid-afternoon, they had the herd settled in their new location. They were all soaked to the skin, and Catherine's arms ached from holding the reins in the driving rain. "You did well," Grant told her as they rode back toward the ranch. "Not many city women would volunteer for cattle work in a storm." "I'm not a city woman anymore," she replied, pushing wet hair from her face. "And I'd rather be useful than sitting in the house worrying." Something changed between them that day. Grant began to include her more in the workings of the ranch, teaching her about cattle breeding, the seasonal rhythms of ranching, the challenges and rewards of the life he'd chosen. For her part, Catherine was an eager student, absorbing everything she could learn about this new world. As weeks passed and summer gave way to autumn, the ranch flourished under Catherine's care. The house became a home, with touches that reflected her presence: wildflowers on the table, curtains she'd sewn from fabric purchased on their monthly trip to town, the scent of fresh bread and apple pie regularly filling the kitchen. Grant noticed these changes with quiet appreciation. He found himself looking forward to returning to the house each evening, to the warm light in the windows and Catherine's smile when he walked through the door. Sometimes he caught himself watching her as she worked, the graceful movement of her hands kneading dough, the way she hummed softly to herself while hanging laundry, how the sunlight caught the red highlights in her hair. These thoughts troubled him. Catherine was his employee, not a potential sweetheart. She depended on him for her livelihood, which created an imbalance he was uncomfortable with. Besides, she was educated, refined. Surely she would want to return to civilization eventually, not spend her life on a remote ranch with a war-weary cowboy. Catherine, meanwhile, was experiencing her own confusion. She'd come to the ranch out of necessity, expecting to find a temporary haven while she planned her future. Instead, she'd found a place where she felt needed, respected, and increasingly at home. Grant was unlike any man she'd known, honorable to his core, hardworking, gentle despite his imposing physical presence. She found herself looking for reasons to be near him, asking questions about the ranch that would keep him talking, savoring their evenings by the fire when he would sometimes read aloud from one of the few books he owned. One evening in late October, as the first frost silvered the grass, they sat before the fireplace after dinner. Grant was mending a bridle while Catherine darned socks, comfortable in their shared silence. "Winter will be here soon," Grant remarked, testing the strength of his stitching. "The first snow usually comes by mid-November." "Is it very harsh here?" Catherine asked, having never experienced a Colorado winter. "It can be. We get heavy snow, bitter cold. The work doesn't stop, the animals still need care, but it's different, more about survival than progress." He set the bridle aside. Miguel usually stays with his family for part of the winter. The path to their settlement can become impassable with snow. Catherine considered this. "Will it just be the two of us then?" "Yes," Grant cleared his throat. "If that makes you uncomfortable, I would understand if you wanted to take lodging in town during the worst months." She looked up, surprised. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly, then more measured. "No, but I want you to feel safe." "I do feel safe here, with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Grant's eyes met hers, and for a moment Catherine thought he might say something more. Instead, he stood abruptly. "It's getting late. Good night, Miss O'Brien." "Good night, Mr. Dawson," she replied formally, though they'd been using first names for weeks. She watched him climb the stairs, wondering what had caused his sudden withdrawal. The first snow came earlier than expected, in the first week of November. Catherine woke to a world transformed, the familiar landscape now blanketed in pristine white, trees etched with frost, the creek partially frozen at its edges. The beauty of it took her breath away. Grant spent the day ensuring the cattle had access to feed and that the barn was secure against the coming winter. When he returned to the house that evening, he carried an armload of firewood and news that Miguel would be leaving for his family's settlement the next day. "The forecast doesn't look good," he explained as he built up the fire. "Better for him to go now while the trails are still passable." The following morning, they said goodbye to Miguel, who promised to return in early spring. As they watched him ride away, Catherine felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of her was nervous about being truly alone with Grant for the first time, while another part anticipated the closeness that might develop without Miguel's constant presence. That evening, a blizzard hit the ranch. The wind howled around the eaves of the house, driving snow against the windows with such force that Catherine feared the glass might crack. Grant added extra logs to the fire and checked all the windows and doors to ensure they were secure. "Will the animals be all right?" Catherine asked, wrapping a shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The cattle have a sheltered draw they can huddle in, and the horses are snug in the barn," Grant assured her. "I'll check on them at first light, but they know how to survive these storms better than we do sometimes." As the night deepened and the storm raged, they sat together before the fire, closer than usual, drawn by the warmth and the comfort of companionship in the face of nature's fury. Grant produced a battered chess set from a cupboard, and they played while the wind moaned outside. "My father taught me to play," Catherine said as she considered her move. "He said it would teach me to think strategically." "My grandfather taught me," Grant replied. "He said it would teach me patience. I'm still waiting for that lesson to take." Catherine laughed, moving her bishop. "Check." Grant studied the board with a frown that gradually transformed into a smile. "Well played." 3 moves later, she had him in checkmate. He conceded with good grace, and as he gathered the pieces, his fingers brushed against hers. The contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through Catherine that had nothing to do with the static electricity in the dry winter air. "Another game," she suggested, her voice not quite steady. Grant shook his head. "I know when I'm outmatched." He stood, stretching. "I should get some sleep." "The morning chores will be twice as difficult in this snow." Of course, Catherine tried to hide her disappointment. Good night, Grant. He paused at the base of the stairs, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Catherine, he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. Sleep well. The blizzard lasted 3 days, confining them largely to the house except for Grant's necessary trips to care for the animals. By the 3rd day, they had settled into a comfortable routine breakfast together. Then Grant would head out to the barn while Catherine baked, mended, or read from Grant's small collection of books. When he returned, they would share lunch, and then he would head out again until dusk. The evenings were the best part, long hours by the fire, talking, playing chess or cards, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. Catherine learned more about Grant's experiences during the war, though he spoke of them reluctantly and only in broad strokes. In turn, she told him about her life in Boston, her mother's death from consumption, and her father's gradual decline into gambling and drink after their move west. He wasn't always that way, she said, gazing into the fire. He was a good doctor, a good father. I think he just couldn't bear his grief alone. Some men aren't built to withstand loss, Grant replied quietly. After Sam died, there were days I considered selling the ranch, heading somewhere new, starting over. What stopped you? He considered the question. Obligation at first. This was Sam's dream as much as mine. Selling felt like betraying him. He looked around the room. But then, gradually, it became something more. This place, it gets under your skin, becomes part of you. Catherine nodded, understanding perfectly. In just a few months, the ranch had become home in a way Silver Creek never had. The rhythms of ranch life suited her: the early mornings, the satisfaction of necessary work, the quiet evenings when the day's labor was done. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Drifts of snow higher than Catherine's waist surrounded the house, and icicles hung from the eaves like crystal daggers. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, the sun dazzling on the pristine snow. I need to check the herd, Grant said after breakfast. Some may have strayed during the storm. I'll come with you, Catherine offered, already reaching for her coat. Grant hesitated. It's bitter cold out there. All the more reason for 2 of us to go. If there are strays, we'll find them faster together. He couldn't argue with her logic. They bundled up in their warmest clothes and set out on horseback, the horses pushing through drifts with dogged determination. The main herd was where Grant expected, huddled in a protected draw, but several cattle were missing. They split up to search, agreeing to meet back at that spot in 2 hours. Catherine rode along the creek, scanning the snowy landscape for any sign of the missing animals. About a mile from the ranch, she spotted tracks leading into a stand of pines and followed them cautiously. There, in a small clearing, she found 2 cows and a calf, trapped by fallen branches heavy with snow. The animals were distressed but appeared unharmed. Catherine dismounted, intending to clear the branches and lead the cattle back to the herd. She was making good progress when her foot slipped on an icy patch hidden beneath the snow. She fell awkwardly, a sharp pain shooting through her ankle. When she tried to stand, the pain intensified, and she knew immediately that she'd sprained it badly. The situation was potentially dangerous. The temperature was well below freezing, and though she was warmly dressed, prolonged exposure could be deadly. Her horse, fortunately, hadn't spooked, but she wasn't sure she could mount without putting weight on her injured ankle. Catherine considered her options. She could try to get back on her horse and ride for help, or she could wait, hoping Grant would come looking for her when she didn't return at the agreed time. Given the risk of falling again and perhaps injuring herself more seriously, waiting seemed the wiser choice. She managed to hobble to a fallen log, brushing off the snow so she could sit. To keep the cattle from wandering off again, she looped her rope around a tree near their improvised pen. Then she settled in to wait, stamping her good foot and clapping her gloved hands to maintain circulation. An hour passed, then another. The sun had begun its early winter descent when Catherine heard the welcome sound of hoofbeats approaching. Grant appeared at the edge of the clearing, his face tight with worry. Catherine, he dismounted in one fluid motion and was at her side in seconds. What happened? Are you hurt? "I found the strays," she said, gesturing to the cattle, "but I slipped and twisted my ankle. I don't think I can walk on it." Grant's relief that she was alive quickly gave way to concern as he examined her ankle through her boot. "We need to get you back to the house. Can you ride if I help you up?" "I think so." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, setting her gently on her horse. Then he secured the cattle, attaching a lead rope so they could bring them back to the ranch. The ride home was painful, each step of the horse sending jolts through Catherine's ankle despite Grant's efforts to set a gentle pace. When they finally reached the ranch, he lifted her from the saddle and carried her into the house, ignoring her protests that she could manage with his support. He set her carefully on the sofa before building up the fire. "I need to put the horses away and secure those cattle. I'll be back as quickly as I can." True to his word, Grant returned within half an hour. He removed Catherine's boot with careful hands, his expression grim as he examined her swollen ankle. "It's not broken, I think, but it's a bad sprain," he said. "We need to reduce the swelling." He gathered snow in a cloth and applied it gently to her ankle, then fetched bandages to wrap it securely. His movements were practiced, efficient. "You've done this before," Catherine observed through gritted teeth as he worked. "In the war," he confirmed. "Field hospitals were always short-staffed. Those of us with any aptitude for it learned basic medical care." He secured the bandage. "This will help, but you need to stay off it for at least a few days." "But there's so much to do, it will wait," he said firmly. "Your health comes first." Over the next few days, Grant took on all the household tasks in addition to his regular work with the ranch. He brought Catherine books to read, moved a small table near the sofa so she could reach what she needed, and even attempted to bake bread with disastrous but amusing results that left them both laughing amid clouds of flour. Catherine was surprised by his competence in caring for her. Grant changed her bandages, made sure she elevated her ankle, and brought her willow bark tea for the pain. His hands, rough from ranch work, were unexpectedly gentle. On the third evening, as they sat before the fire after dinner, Catherine finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Where did you learn to be so gentle? Most men I know would be completely at a loss caring for an invalid." Grant was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was ill for many years before she died. My father and I cared for her together." His gaze was fixed on the flames. "She taught me that gentleness isn't weakness, that sometimes it takes more strength to be kind than to be harsh." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was." He looked up, meeting Catherine's eyes. "You remind me of her sometimes, the same quiet strength, the determination." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. "Thank you for taking care of me these past days. I know it's added to your burden." "You're not a burden, Catherine." His voice was low, intense. "You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch to me in a very long time." The words hung between them, more significant than any that had passed between them before. Catherine's heart beat faster as Grant moved from his chair to sit beside her on the sofa, careful not to jostle her injured ankle. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he said, his usual confidence replaced by an endearing uncertainty. "When I saw you on that auction block, I knew I couldn't let anyone else take you. I told myself it was just common decency, that any man with a conscience would have done the same." He took a deep breath. "But these past months, I've come to realize it was more than that. Something about you called to me even then, before I knew your name or your story." Catherine's throat tightened with emotion. "Grant, please let me finish." He took her hand in his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I promised you this was a business arrangement, and I've tried to honor that. But my feelings for you have grown beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship." He met her gaze directly, vulnerability clear in his eyes. "I care for you, Catherine, deeply, and if you don't feel the same, I understand. Nothing has to change. You'll always have a place here, regardless." Catherine's heart felt too full for her chest. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "When you raised your hand at that auction, you saved me from a fate I can't bear to contemplate. But since then, you've given me so much more than safety. You've given me a home, purpose, respect." Her voice softened. "And somewhere along the way, I gave you my heart in return. Grant's expression transformed, hope dawning like sunrise. "Do you mean that?" In answer, Catherine leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question and an answer all at once. Then Grant's arms came around her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth they created together. When they finally parted, both breathless, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find love again, especially not like this." "Neither did I," Catherine admitted. "But perhaps that's how love works best, finding us when we least expect it." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Though Catherine's room remained her own, Grant was adamant about propriety. Their evenings together took on a new sweetness. They spoke openly of their feelings, shared dreams for the future, and exchanged kisses by the firelight that grew increasingly difficult to end. As Catherine's ankle healed and winter settled fully over the ranch, they developed new routines. Grant taught her to shoot, insisting she know how to protect herself if necessary. Catherine expanded her cooking repertoire, experimenting with the preserved foods they had stored for winter. They read to each other in the evenings poetry, novels, newspapers from town when Grant could get them. In December, a brief thaw made the trails passable, and Grant rode into Silver Creek for supplies. He returned with not only provisions but also a small pine tree, which they decorated with paper ornaments Catherine crafted and candles Grant had splurged on. "Christmas was always special in my family," he explained as they admired their handiwork. "Even during the hardest times, we made sure to celebrate." On Christmas morning, Catherine presented Grant with a hand-knitted scarf and a journal she'd made by binding paper and covering it with fabric. "For your thoughts," she explained. "You told me once that you sometimes have trouble sleeping, remembering the war. Writing might help." Grant was visibly touched by the thoughtfulness of her gifts. "I have something for you too," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Catherine found a silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she discovered a tiny pencil sketch of the ranch house. "I had it made in town," Grant explained. "The jeweler's wife is quite artistic. I thought, wherever life takes you, you'd have a reminder of this place." "It's beautiful," Catherine whispered, blinking back tears. "Would you help me put it on?" Grant fastened the necklace, his fingers lingering on the nape of her neck. "There's something else I want to give you," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "but I'm not sure if it's too soon." Catherine turned to face him, the locket warm against her skin. "What is it?" Instead of answering immediately, Grant took her hands in his. "These past months have shown me what my life could be with you in it. I know our beginning was unusual, and perhaps this is too fast, but—" He took a deep breath. "Catherine O'Brien, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bloomed in Catherine's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "Are you certain? I have nothing to bring to this marriage, no dowry, no family connections." "You bring yourself," Grant said simply. "That's all I want or need." "Then yes," Catherine replied, her smile radiant. "Yes, I will marry you, Grant Dawson." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and future, before reluctantly pulling away. "I wish we could marry immediately, but the minister only comes through Silver Creek every few months." "I don't mind waiting," Catherine assured him. "It gives us time to prepare, to make plans." The engagement brought a new dimension to their relationship. They began to discuss the future in concrete terms: improvements to the ranch, the possibility of children someday, dreams of expanding their operation when finances allowed. Winter nights seemed less cold, less isolating, with the warmth of their shared plans to sustain them. January brought the harshest weather of the season, with temperatures dropping so low that the creek froze solid and even the sturdiest pines creaked with cold. They kept to the house except for essential chores, conserving firewood and drawing comfort from each other's company. On one particularly bitter night, as wind rattled the windows and snow piled against the doors, they sat wrapped in blankets before the fire, Grant reading aloud from a volume of Whitman while Catherine worked on a quilt she'd started for their marriage bed. A sudden pounding at the door startled them both. Grant set down the book, reaching for the rifle he kept near at hand. "Stay here," he told Catherine, moving cautiously to the door. When he opened it, they found a man on the threshold, nearly frozen and barely conscious. Grant helped him inside, and together they eased him into a chair by the fire. Catherine immediately set water to boil for tea while Grant removed the stranger's ice-encrusted coat. "Thank you," the man managed through chattering teeth. He was in his 40s, well-dressed beneath the snow-crusted outer layers, with the bearing of an educated man. "I feared I wouldn't find shelter before the cold took me." "What brings you out in weather like this?" Grant asked, offering the man a blanket. "I'm Dr. James Wilson from Denver," he explained, accepting the hot tea Catherine brought. "I was traveling to a patient in Silver Creek when my horse went lame. I tried to continue on foot, but the storm worsened." Catherine's attention sharpened at the mention of his profession. "You're a doctor." "My father was a physician as well." Dr. Wilson looked at her with interest. "Was he indeed? Might I know him?" "Dr. Thomas O'Brien. He practiced in Silver Creek until his death last summer." Recognition dawned in the doctor's eyes. "O'Brien, I corresponded with him several times. He wrote a fascinating paper on treatments for mountain fever." He studied Catherine's face. "You must be his daughter. He spoke of you with great pride in his letters." Tears pricked Catherine's eyes at this unexpected connection to her father's better days, before the gambling and drinking had overtaken him. "You knew him through his work, indeed. He was respected in medical circles." Dr. Wilson sipped his tea. "I was saddened to hear of his passing. I had hoped to meet him in person one day." They provided the doctor with a hot meal and made a bed for him on the sofa, as the storm showed no signs of abating. Before retiring, Dr. Wilson examined the medical kit he'd managed to keep with him. "I always travel prepared," he explained, opening the leather case to reveal neatly organized instruments and medicines. "One never knows when one's services might be needed." The next morning, the storm had lessened enough that they could assess the situation. The doctor's horse was indeed lame, with no possibility of traveling for at least a week. "You're welcome to stay until your horse recovers," Grant offered, "or until the trails are clear enough that I can take you to town." "You're very kind," Dr. Wilson replied. "I hate to impose, but I accept your hospitality with gratitude." The doctor proved to be an engaging guest, full of stories from his travels across the territory. He took an interest in the ranch operations, asking thoughtful questions about cattle breeding and land management. In the evenings, he entertained them with news from Denver and discussions of advances in medicine. On the third day of his stay, Catherine approached him with a question that had been on her mind. "Dr. Wilson, did my father ever mention his difficulties to you?" The doctor's expression softened. "He alluded to personal struggles in his later letters. I gathered there were financial problems." Catherine nodded. "After my mother died, he began gambling. It grew worse over time. When he died, I discovered he'd accumulated substantial debts." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Grief affects people in different ways, and gambling can become a disease of its own." He hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you come to be here on this ranch?" Catherine exchanged a glance with Grant, who nodded slightly, giving her permission to share their story. "When my father died, his creditors came after me for payment," she explained. "When I couldn't pay, they put me up for auction to cover the debts." She took a steadying breath. "Grant was there. He outbid everyone else and brought me here, offering me employment and respect when others would have offered neither." Dr. Wilson looked appalled. "They auctioned you? That's barbaric and illegal, I should think." "Perhaps," Grant said grimly, "but the law is applied differently to women with no protectors and no means." The doctor shook his head. "A shameful business," he turned to Catherine. "And now, I gather from observing you together that your relationship has evolved beyond employer and employee." Catherine smiled, taking Grant's hand. "We're engaged to be married." "I see," Dr. Wilson said, his expression clearing. "A happy ending to an unfortunate beginning. I'm glad for you both." Over the next few days, the doctor observed their interaction with increasing approval. On the morning of his departure, his horse having recovered enough for travel, and the weather having improved, he took Grant aside while Catherine prepared provisions for his journey. "You have something special here," he told Grant. Not just the ranch, though it's a fine property, but your relationship with Catherine. It's rare to see such genuine affection and respect between a man and woman. She's extraordinary, Grant agreed. I'm fortunate beyond measure that she agreed to share her life with me, indeed. The doctor hesitated. I wonder if I might make a proposition before I leave. I've been considering opening a second practice. Silver Creek is growing, and they're in need of a physician since Dr. O'Brien's passing. I could use an assistant, someone with intelligence and a steady hand. He glanced toward the kitchen where Catherine was packing food. Your fiancée has both, and she has her father's medical knowledge as well, I suspect. Grant considered this. You'd have to discuss it with Catherine, of course, but may I ask why? Tell me first. Because I wouldn't want to come between you, Dr. Wilson explained. It would mean Catherine traveling to town several days a week, or perhaps staying there occasionally if there were patients needing constant care. I wouldn't make the offer if you objected. Grant's expression was thoughtful. Catherine is her own woman. If this is something she wants, I would support her completely. When the proposition was put to Catherine, her initial response was surprise, followed by cautious interest. I did assist my father sometimes, she admitted, and I've read most of his medical books. You have an aptitude for it, Dr. Wilson assured her. I can provide training for what you don't know, and it would be a way to honor your father's better legacy, continuing his work in healing rather than dwelling on his mistakes. After lengthy discussion with both men, Catherine agreed to consider the offer. Dr. Wilson would return in the spring to discuss specifics if she decided to accept. As they watched the doctor ride away, Grant put his arm around Catherine's shoulders. Are you tempted by his offer? I am, she admitted. I never considered medicine as a possibility for myself, but there's something appealing about helping others that way. She looked up at him. Would you truly not mind if I spent time away from the ranch? I would miss you every minute, Grant said honestly, but I would never stand in the way of something that might fulfill you. Besides, he added with a smile, it would give me a reason to go to town more often. February brought milder weather, allowing them to resume more normal ranch activities. Grant began preparations for spring calving, repairing pens and ensuring they had supplies for any difficult births. Catherine started seedlings for the garden, planning an expanded plot for the coming growing season. In the evenings, they continued to plan their wedding, which they hoped to hold in April when the circuit minister was next scheduled to visit Silver Creek. Catherine worked on a special dress, using fabric Grant had ordered from Denver as a surprise. Grant, meanwhile, was secretly crafting a wedding gift, a rocking chair for the porch, where they could sit together and watch the sunset over their land. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Grant broached a subject he'd been considering for some time. I've been thinking about the ranch, about our future here. Catherine set aside her sewing. What about it? Sam and I always plan to expand eventually. We talked about breeding horses as well as cattle, maybe growing our herd. He took her hand. But those were two bachelor's dreams. I want to know what you envision for our life together. The question touched Catherine deeply. No man had ever asked for her opinion on such matters before, not even her father. I love the ranch as it is, she said thoughtfully, but I see its potential too. The land near the creek would be perfect for growing hay if we cleared it. And I've noticed the wild berries that grow on the north slope. We could cultivate those for preserves. Grant nodded, clearly pleased by her engagement with the idea. What about children? Would you want them to grow up here? I can't imagine a better place, Catherine said softly. Room to run, animals to care for, nature all around them. Yes, I would want that very much. They talked late into the night, sharing dreams and practical plans alike. By the time they retired to their separate rooms, maintaining propriety until their wedding, they had a clear vision for their future together. A thriving ranch, children to inherit it someday, and Catherine dividing her time between ranch responsibilities and assisting Dr. Wilson in town. March arrived with its characteristic unpredictability, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, the land caught between winter's grip and spring's promise. Miguel returned from his family's settlement, bringing news from the outside world and welcome assistance with the ranch work. He was delighted to learn of their engagement. "I knew it," he declared, slapping Grant on the back. "From the moment I returned last fall, I could see the way you looked at each other. Like my grandmother's old horses, they worked side by side for 20 years and still nickered when they saw each other." Grant laughed at the comparison but didn't dispute it. The ranch felt complete again with Miguel's return, allowing Grant and Catherine more time together as the wedding approached. In early April, they made the journey to Silver Creek for final wedding preparations. The town had changed little since Catherine had last seen it, though the faces that turned to watch their arrival held curiosity rather than pity or condemnation. Word had spread about her engagement to Grant Dawson, transforming her status from disgraced doctor's daughter to respectable rancher's fiancée. They stayed at the small hotel in separate rooms as befitted an unmarried couple. The circuit minister, Reverend Tompkins, arrived the next day, and they met with him to discuss the ceremony, which would be held in the town's small church. During their time in town, Catherine also met with Dr. Wilson, who had returned as promised to discuss her potential role in his practice. They agreed she would assist him 2 days a week once they were settled after the wedding, with the understanding that her duties at the ranch would always take precedence during busy seasons. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with spring flowers blooming in the churchyard and birds singing in the cottonwoods along the creek. Catherine prepared in her hotel room, assisted by the hotel owner's wife, who had taken a liking to her. The dress she had made was simple but elegant cream-colored cotton with lace she had salvaged from one of her mother's old gowns. At the appointed hour, she walked alone to the church. She had no family to give her away, no bridesmaids to attend her. Yet as she approached the small white building, she felt no lack. The life she was choosing, the man she was choosing, filled her heart too completely for regret. Grant waited at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his beard trimmed. Miguel stood beside him as best man, beaming with pride. A small gathering of townspeople, Dr. Wilson, the general store owner and his wife, the blacksmith and his family, filled the few pews. As Catherine walked down the aisle, her eyes locked with Grant's, and everything else faded away. The months since that fateful day at the auction house seemed both an eternity and an instant, a journey that had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with clear voices and full hearts. When Reverend Tompkins pronounced them husband and wife, Grant's kiss was gentle but held the promise of passion to come. The small congregation applauded, genuinely happy for the couple whose unusual beginning had blossomed into a true love match. A simple reception followed at the hotel with cake and punch and well wishes from the townspeople. Dr. Wilson presented them with a handsome leather-bound medical reference book inscribed to Mrs. Catherine Dawson, assistant physician. The general store owner and his wife gave them a fine quilt, and Miguel surprised them with a pair of matched silver conchos for their saddles, crafted by his brother-in-law. They departed for the ranch in the late afternoon, riding side by side as husband and wife for the first time. The journey that had once seemed so long to Catherine now felt like coming home, especially with Grant beside her. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Grant reined his horse to a stop. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson," he said, reaching across to take her hand. Catherine's heart swelled with emotion. "It feels right, doesn't it? Like this is exactly where we're supposed to be." "It does." He squeezed her hand. "I remember the day I first brought you here. You looked so wary, so uncertain. I hoped you'd find peace here, but I never dared hope you'd find love that you'd choose to stay. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you said you didn't believe in owning people," Catherine admitted, "when you gave me a choice instead of an order." No man had ever done that before. Grant's expression grew serious. "I promise to always give you choices, Catherine, to respect your mind and your heart as much as I cherish your presence in my life." "And I promise to build this life with you," she replied, "through whatever challenges come our way." They rode the rest of the way to the ranch in companionable silence, each contemplating the vows they had made and the future stretching before them. Miguel had ridden ahead after the reception to prepare the house, and as they approached, they saw lanterns glowing in the windows and smoke rising from the chimney. Grant helped Catherine dismount, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold of their home. Inside, they found the house transformed, fresh flowers on the table, a special dinner keeping warm on the stove, and a bottle of wine with a note from Miguel saying he would stay in the bunkhouse to give them privacy. Their wedding night was everything Catherine had hoped for: tender, passionate, a true joining of souls as well as bodies. Grant was gentle with her inexperience, guiding her with patience and care until they found their rhythm together. Afterward, lying in his arms, Catherine felt a completeness she had never known was possible. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "More than I knew I could love anyone." Grant's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Catherine Dawson. You've made me whole again." Spring unfolded around them as they settled into married life. The ranch thrived under their combined care. Catherine's garden flourished, Grant's cattle grew fat on the new grass, and Miguel's expert horsemanship kept everything running smoothly. Twice a week, Catherine rode into town to assist Dr. Wilson, gaining knowledge and confidence in her medical abilities while bringing care to those who needed it. In June, they cleared the land near the creek as they had planned, preparing it for hay cultivation. The work was hard but satisfying, and in the evenings, they would sit in the rocking chair Grant had made, watching the sunset and talking about their day. Summer brought its own rhythms: cattle drives to market, preserving the garden's bounty for winter, occasional social gatherings with neighboring ranchers. Their circle of acquaintances widened as word spread of the Dawson Ranch's hospitality and the skilled medical assistance available there when Dr. Wilson was absent. In August, as the first anniversary of their meeting approached, Catherine shared news that brought Grant to his knees with joy. She was expecting their first child, due in early spring. They celebrated privately, savoring the secret between them for a few precious weeks before sharing it with Miguel and their friends in town. The pregnancy progressed well, with Dr. Wilson keeping a careful eye on Catherine's health. She continued her medical work into the winter, scaling back only when travel became difficult. Grant was attentive without being overprotective, trusting Catherine to know her own limits while ensuring she had everything she needed for comfort. Their first Christmas as a married couple was especially joyful, with the promise of new life adding to the season's meaning. They decorated the tree as they had the year before, but this time they added a tiny carved cradle beneath it, Grant's gift to their unborn child. Winter passed in peaceful anticipation. They prepared the house for the baby, converting a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery. Catherine sewed tiny garments while Grant crafted a crib and a small rocking horse. Miguel announced his intention to be the child's honorary uncle, already planning the day he would teach his sobrino, or Sabrina, to ride. In March 1877, just as the first wildflowers began to appear on the hillsides, Catherine went into labor. The birth was difficult but ultimately successful, with Dr. Wilson attending and Grant refusing to leave her side despite convention. After hours of labor, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately captured her father's heart. "She's perfect," Grant whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "What shall we name her?" Catherine, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at the tableau of father and daughter. "I'd like to name her Grace, after your mother." "Grace Elizabeth Dawson," Grant agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world, little one." As spring deepened into summer, Grace thrived, growing stronger each day. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin, a combination that delighted them both. Catherine balanced motherhood with her medical work, sometimes bringing Grace with her to town where the baby became a favorite among Dr. Wilson's patients. The ranch prospered alongside their growing family. Grant's careful breeding program improved their cattle stock, while Catherine's experiments with new crops expanded their harvest. They built a proper clinic space in a corner of the house, where Catherine could treat minor injuries and illnesses for neighboring ranchers without the need for a trip to town. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch in the rocking chair, Grace sleeping in Catherine's arms or playing on a blanket at their feet. Sometimes Grant would bring out his harmonica he'd improved with practice and play simple tunes that made Grace coo and reach for the source of the music. "Do you ever think about that day?" Catherine asked one evening as they watched the sun set over their land. "The auction?" Grant considered the question. "Not the way I used to. It used to haunt me what might have happened if I hadn't been there or if I hadn't had enough money. And now? Now I see it as the day our story began." He reached over to take her hand. "Not the best beginning, perhaps, but look where it led us." Catherine gazed at their daughter, now asleep on her blanket with one tiny fist curled beside her cheek. "The auctioneer called out my name, the cowboy raised his hand, and life became more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible." Grant lifted her hand to his lips. "And our story is still being written, my love, every day with every choice we make together." As twilight deepened around them, they sat in contented silence, 3 hearts beating in the rhythm of family, home, and abiding love. The ranch stretched before them, a legacy they would pass to their children and perhaps their children's children, a place of safety, possibility, and belonging that had begun with a desperate bid at an auction and blossomed into a life neither of them could have imagined on that fateful day. 5 years later, the Dawson Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the county. Grace, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's love for horses and her mother's quick mind, had been joined by a 3-year-old brother, Thomas, named for Catherine's father. The family had expanded their home, adding rooms as their needs grew, but maintaining the warm, welcoming atmosphere that had characterized it from the beginning. Catherine's work with Dr. Wilson had evolved into a formal partnership. Together, they had established a proper clinic in Silver Creek, with Catherine focusing particularly on women's and children's health. Her reputation had grown to the point that women sometimes traveled considerable distances to seek her care. Grant had expanded their operations to include horse breeding, with a line of quarter horses that were becoming known throughout the territory for their intelligence and stamina. Miguel remained a valued part of their extended family, now serving as foreman for a crew of ranch hands they employed during busy seasons. On warm evenings, the family still gathered on the porch, now expanded to wrap around 2 sides of the house to watch the sunset and share stories of their day. Sometimes neighbors joined them, or travelers passing through would stop for a meal and conversation before continuing their journey. On one such evening, as Catherine sat with baby Thomas nursing at her breast and Grace leaning against her father's knee while he told her stories of his childhood in Virginia, a rider approached the ranch. It was Dr. Wilson, returning from a house call at a distant farm. "Good evening, Dawsons." He called as he dismounted. "Room for one more, always," Grant replied, rising to greet his friend. "Grace, fetch Dr. Wilson some lemonade, please." The little girl ran eagerly to fulfill her mission, pleased to be trusted with such a grown-up task, "Doctor." Wilson settled into a chair with a grateful sigh. "Difficult case?" Catherine asked, noting his weary expression. "Challenging, but successful. Mrs. Peterson delivered twins, both boys, both healthy despite being early." He accepted the lemonade Grace brought him with a smile of thanks. "I could have used your assistance, Catherine." "Next time," she promised. "Thomas has been fussy with teething." The doctor nodded understandingly. "Family first always. That's what I admire about you both. Your priorities are clear." He took a long drink of lemonade. "I've been meaning to tell you I received a letter from a medical college in Denver. They're interested in our work here, particularly Catherine's innovations in maternity care." Catherine looked up, surprised. "My methods are hardly innovative. They're based on what I learned from my father and from you, combined with your own observations and the traditional women's knowledge you've gathered from Mexican and Indian midwives," Dr. Wilson countered. "Your approach is unique, and your results speak for themselves." The college wants you to write a paper on your methods. Grant beamed with pride. That's wonderful news, Catherine looked thoughtful. I've never considered myself a scholar. Yet you keep meticulous records and have a gift for explaining complex ideas clearly, Dr. Wilson pointed out. This could help many women beyond those you can treat personally. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Grant found Catherine sitting at her desk, already making notes for the paper. "You've decided to do it then?" he asked, massaging her shoulders. "I think I must," she replied, leaning back into his touch, "if my experiences can help others." She glanced toward the children's rooms. Every mother deserves the best chance to see her children grow up. Grant bent to kiss the top of her head. "I'm so proud of you. Of all you've accomplished, all you continue to strive for." Catherine set down her pen and turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "None of it would have been possible without you. You gave me more than freedom that day at the auction house. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be." "You did that yourself," Grant insisted. "I just provided the opportunity, and that's no small thing." She rose to embrace him. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? Everyone has options, some are just better than others." Grant nodded, recalling the words clearly despite the years that had passed. "You've always made sure I had the best options," Catherine continued. "To work with Dr. Wilson, to develop my own methods, to be both a mother and a healer. Not every husband would support his wife in such endeavors." "Not every husband is married to such an extraordinary woman," Grant replied, drawing her closer. "Besides, our arrangement works for both of us. Your work in town keeps you connected to a community beyond the ranch, while still allowing you to be here for the children and for me." They moved to the bed, settling into the familiar comfort of each other's arms. Outside, the night was alive with the sounds of the ranch horses in the corral, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the rustle of wind through the aspens by the creek. These were the sounds of home, of the life they had built together from an unlikely beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked softly, echoing a question she had asked years before, but with a different meaning now. "Taking on a wife, children, all these responsibilities, when you could have remained a bachelor with fewer complications." Grant's answer came without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. Everything of value in my life came from that day when the auctioneer called your name and I raised my hand." He kissed her gently. "I went to town for supplies and came home with my future." Catherine smiled against his lips. "Our future, built day by day, choice by choice." "And still being written," Grant agreed, drawing her closer as the ranch settled into night around them. A sanctuary of love and possibility that had begun with a desperate bid and blossomed into a legacy of healing, growth, and abiding love.